Good afternoon. Thank you everybody for joining. This is Nathan Sable with Gen Edge. Thanks for joining our webinar on CMMC 2.0. We're very excited to talk to you about some of the updates in CMMC 2.0. We've gotten a lot of requests from the business community here in Virginia for some updates on CMMC 2.0, and I'm joined here by Derek Kernus from DTS Consulting. He's the Director of Cybersecurity at DTS, and he's one of our Alliance members. DTS has been working with us to help several companies in Virginia get CMMC compliant and support them with the remediation. And Derek is a subject matter expert in CMMC and CMMC 2.0. So he's going to talk to you today about the updates he's seeing and how your company can apply the new changes in CMMC 2.0 to your business. And then we'll take a Q&A from the crowd through the chat feature and try to answer any questions that you might have about CMMC 2.0. So we're really excited to have him and have you join. This webinar has been long overdue, and we're excited to have you join us for today. Just some updates, with Gen Edge Alliance, some of the things that we've been doing to make sure that we're in line with CMMC 2.0. Our program, our remediation program, our CMMC program is still in line with CMMC 2.0, and it's broken up currently in two phases. Our phase one is still working with gap assessments, supporting companies with the DFAR 7012 clause. And I would like to remind everyone that the DFAR 7012 clause is still the current standard on the books right now, and companies need to be in compliant with DFAR 7012, which means having a system security plan, an incident response plan, plan of action and milestone, an incident response plan, and be able to have a SPUR score that they can enter into the SPRS system. Some of the changes with CMMC 2.0 is really focusing on the Nist 800-171 standards, and we have ensured our gap assessments to be in line with that Nist 800-171 requirement. Just an update on the gap assessment. For the last year, we've been working with DoD on a grant that's been provided to us by DoD to help companies pay for some of that gap assessment and the requirement to get into DFAR 7012. Since April, we've done about 60 gap assessments for companies, individual companies. And we have about 25 spots still left in through the grant program to help pay for the DFAR 7012 compliance, the gap assessment. So if you haven't already, and if you are still needing to be in compliance with DFAR 7012, I highly urge you to apply. We're still taking applicants for that program, for that subsidy. It's first come, first serve. So once we run out of those 25 spots that are still open, the program will close, and there won't be any more funding for that. So just a reminder, if you haven't applied already, please apply before the spots are all gone. In conjunction with that, our phase two remediation program is still up and running. We have 25 Alliance members that we're working with to help companies complete their plan of action and milestone and do their Nist 800-171 requirements. Those 25 Alliance members are continuing to support the small business community to get compliant, and we're helping them reach that CMMC 2.0, either a level 1 or a level 2 certification. So we've had several companies enter that program and working towards that compliance. So that's the overarching things about the Gen Edge program that I'd like to talk to you about. I can definitely answer more in-depth questions during the Q&A, but I would love to hear from Derek and hear from some of the updates that he's been tracking with CMMC 2.0. So Derek, I'll turn it over to you if you'd like to go through it with everyone and provide us with a quick overview, if you don't mind.
Will do. Thank you, Nathan. And thank you to Gen Ed for having DTS on. We're excited to share these updates with everyone on the call today. If you give me a moment, I'll share my screen. As Nathan mentioned, the current requirement for many organizations that have CUI in a contract is the DFARS 252.204-7012 requirement. And there are quite a few requirements in that clause, but one of them is the DFARS, or is the requirement to be compliant with Nist 800-171, which is a cybersecurity framework that consists of 110 cybersecurity controls with a mix of technical, operational, and policy and procedure controls. And in a webinar in the summer of 2019, when Katie Arrington first announced the CMMC program, she stated in this webinar that in a random audit of about 1,000 organizations in the DIB, that approximately less than 1% of those organizations that had self-attested to compliance with Nist 800-171 were actually compliant with the model. So DoD felt that their hand was being forced to protect the nation's interest and CUI to create the CMMC program. So about 7 or 8 months later, they came out with CMMC 1.0. And with CMMC 1.0, first things is there are 5 maturity levels, and it was ranged from maturity level 1, which had 17 requirements, which they called it the basic cybersecurity posture, up to advanced cybersecurity posture, maturity level 5, which had over 170 controls. Next, it had every maturity level was going to require certification. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, every organization in the DIB over the course of the 5-year rollout of the program would have to be certified by a third-party assessment organization that had been vetted and certified itself at the highest maturity level that it would be conducting assessments at by the CMMC accreditation body. And the next point, the maturity level 3 is the one that I want to focus on very quickly. This was the highest maturity level where the controls had been fully finalized by the DoD and was the minimum requirement for contracts that were going to have CUI on them, and was a very large focus of the feedback that DoD received from the DIB in the public comment period for the interim rule. This level had 130 controls, and 110 of those 130 were all of the Nist SP 800-171 controls. The additional 20 were commonly referred to as the Delta 20, and they were 20 controls that were policy and procedure related and were specific to CMMC, and they were created by the DoD. And then the next point is the demonstration of maturity in the process, when the process controls for CMMC 1.0. So organizations would have to actually document their configuration control board meetings and demonstrate that they were conducting these, that they were meeting the ongoing monitoring requirements of CMMC, and that they were ingraining these processes into the culture of the organization. And then the next major point of CMMC 1.0, there was no plan of action or milestones allowed for certification. So commonly referred to as POAMs. Every organization would have to meet every control at the maturity level they wanted to be certified at. And if they weren't compliant with even one control, no matter its complexity, they would not reach that certification. And then the final major point here is that all organizations would have to be recertified every 3 years. And this would be to make sure that they were meeting the ongoing monitoring requirements of CMMC, and again, the maturity aspect of the processes, as well as so that they could demonstrate that they were continuing to meet all of the controls at the maturity level that they were certified at. Now, next with CMMC 2.0, DoD made some fairly significant changes because a lot of the feedback they received in the public comment period was based around the fact that this was very challenging for small, medium businesses to implement, as well as very costly. So DoD, first, they changed the model to 3 maturity levels. They removed maturity levels 2 and 4, and they changed maturity level 3 to maturity level 2, and then they changed maturity level 5 to maturity level 3. And this was a natural progression because they had already stated that maturity levels 2 and 4 were not really going to be used in contracts anyway. They were more transitory levels for an organization that wanted to move from 1 to 3 or from 3 to 5. This was, in their words, a cost-saving measure. The next point is that they removed the Delta 20 from the new maturity level 2. In the statement about CMMC 2.0, which was very short, it's a 4-pager statement that was released in November of 2021, they directly aligned maturity level 2 with Nist 800-171, which means that we're back to the original 110 controls of Nist SP 800-171. They also removed the next major point is that they removed the maturity requirement from the model. So organizations no longer have to demonstrate that those processes or policies are ingrained in the culture, that essentially they just have to be documented that they exist at the time that they are being assessed. Now, getting into the assessment part, the next big point here is that certification is only going to be required for organizations that need level 3, CMMC level 3, or prioritized level 2 contracts. Now, level 3 is expected to only be required for about 50 organizations in the DIB. So if you're a small, medium business, I highly doubt that you're going to need maturity level 3. Now, and maturity level 3, the controls are not fully finalized yet. So if you're on this call, I would be focusing more on maturity level 1 or maturity level 2. Now, the next big point here is, okay, if there's no certification, what's the requirement for my organization? Well, for maturity level 1 and maturity level 2 non-prioritized contracts, senior leadership in the company will have to self-attest, and that will have to be done annually. Now, there is a much higher risk for a false claim against this self-attestation than there was previously, than just a couple of years ago. DOJ said last year that they will be using the False Claims Act to prosecute organizations and their senior leadership if there is a cyber breach, and they are found to not be compliant with a framework that they have self-attested to. So, I urge you, if this is where your business ends up sitting, take this self-attestation very seriously. The next big point here with certification, maturity level 2 prioritized and maturity level 3 which both require certification. Those will still have to be certified every 3 years for the exact same reason that we stated with CMMC 1.0. Now, another major change here is that POAMs will be allowed for 6 months after contract award. Previously, at contract award, an organization would have to submit their certification, which they could only have gained if they had met every control at the maturity level that was required for the contract. But now DoD is allowing POAMs for 6 months after contract award. Basically, in my opinion, this is to help facilitate business and make sure that it doesn't slow down the DIB and the work that the DoD is trying to do with industry. Now, there will be limitations to this POAM. What those limitations are, which controls they are specifically are not clear, but there will be certain controls that cannot go onto the POAM. That much we do know. What we don't know is what those controls are. I will say my theory here is that the Nist 800-171 scoring methodology that DoD published last year, it has a weighted subtractor for every control that an organization is not compliant with. So depending on what DoD's importance is for that control or what they place the importance as, it could be -5, -3, or -1 point. So my theory is that every -5 control will probably not be able to go on the POAM, as well as possibly some -3s, but that's still TBD. Then the last big point here is that waivers will be allowed on a very limited basis, but for your organization, I would not bank on this. They have not provided any guidelines on what those waivers are and what they will be allowed for. So, you do not want to put the weight of your contract on a possible waiver. Now, There are some unknowns where, all of the information I just provided was factual, but I'd like to cover some of the unknowns that we're still looking for answers on and provide some of my opinions on this. Look forward to discussing these with you through Q&A, or you can reach out to me afterwards if you like. Happy to chat about them. The first one is what's going to be prioritized versus non-prioritized contracts. So my theory with prioritized, knowing that DoD is very focused on making sure that blueprints and architectural drawings, information about weapon systems and fighter jets and things of that. So CTI will probably be in a prioritized category, as well as any architectural drawings. So if you deal with CAD for any government building or DoD building, probably going to be prioritized, or export controlled data. So that brings me to my next point with actually my next point here is incentives for certification. So DoD has said publicly that they are looking at ways that they can incentivize organizations to get certified at maturity level 2 before the final rulemaking for CMMC 2.0. They have thrown out a couple of different ideas, like increasing the profit margins for those organizations that are certified, which might be a little bit challenging. I think one that's probably more likely is that they will provide additional points to the scoring methodology for award for organizations that do get certified before the final rule. The next point that has to do with the interim rule is the use of the 7019 and the 7020 clause. In the CMMC 2.0 statement, DoD said that they will not use the CMMC clause until the final rulemaking is done for CMMC 2.0. When they released the interim rule, there were 3 clauses released in the interim rule, and it was the 7019, 7020, and 7021. 7021 was the CMMC clause. 7019 is the clause that requires contractors to enter their Nist 800-171 score into SPRS, as well as some other information, basically verifying they have an SSP, an IRP, things of that nature. The 7020 clause is the clause that's the flow down requirement that requires primes to verify that their subs are meeting the SPRS 800-171 scoring requirement. So these are actively being used, and DoD will continue to use them. We have a client that won a $121 million contract that had the 7019 clause in it. We have another client that, now, one thing to keep in mind is that DoD cannot just put these clauses into existing contracts. They will do it on new contracts and on any contract mods. We have another client that, to get additional funding for a research contract, when they did a contract mod to get more funding, DoD inserted the 7019 clause into the contract. We have another client where they're experiencing the effects of this flow down requirement. Their prime, at the beginning of the past 2 years, have sent them a questionnaire that they require them to fill out, inquiring about the company's compliance with 800-171 and whether they have put their score into SPRS. Again, these will continue to be used. However, what's unclear is how they are going to be used by the DoD moving forward. Currently, the requirement is that the score is entered and the other information filled out, like do you have an SSP, et cetera. The score is not being used the actual score itself is not being used during the evaluation. That could still change. So in my opinion, it is best to make sure that the score being put in is the best possible score that it could be at the time that it's needed, which is at the time of award. The next point here is the timing of the final rule. In the CMMC 2.0 statement, it was noted in there that it could be anywhere from 9 to 24 months. And the latest things that I'm hearing and reading is that it is likely that CMMC 2.0, the public comment period for the final rule will come out at the end of 2022, and it's going to be a 60-day public comment period. So it is likely that the final rule will come out at the earliest at the beginning of 2023. So the next point here is what's going to happen with the Delta 20. It's very important to remember that CMMC is a living model, and the requirements for the CMMC could change. And because it's mapped directly to Nist 800-171 now, 800-171 is currently in revision 2. So Nist is in control of that framework, and they can make adjustments to that framework. And I've been reading that they are actively working on revision 3 for Nist 800-171, and the DoD is involved. It would make a lot of sense that DoD would try to get those practices and processes, the Delta 20, back into 800-171. So I've heard that they received a lot of flack in the public comments from the interim rule about the fact that DoD had come up with those controls, which is one of the reasons they removed them. It was also a cost-saving measure for organizations. But again, my opinion, those controls were actually creating a more maturity cybersecurity program for organizations. They were very good controls, albeit, yes, they do add to the cost of the implementation of the program, but once they're stood up, it is better cybersecurity posture. So now with those unknowns covered, I'd like to talk about the way forward. And the first thing to note is just accept that this threat is real. There's two ways that you could look at this for your organization. One is actually protecting your organization. We've all seen the ransomware threats that are out there, and even if you're a small, medium business, that does not mean that you are immune from this and that you are not subject to an attack. And I'll use the very quick example of the Atlanta ransomware attack from a few years ago, where that started. That ransomware was very first identified in a small business in New Jersey, and it was because that bad actor group wanted to attack a small business that they figured was not being monitored and did not have good cybersecurity and use it as a playground to make sure that their ransomware virus worked. Then they moved on to a small town in Arizona and executed the ransomware successfully. Then they went to the Colorado Department of Transportation and successfully deployed the ransomware there, and then continued to escalate to Atlanta. So, every small business is at risk, and ransomware is a threat for every business everywhere. The other part of this is protecting our nation's secure information and working with the DoD and protecting their information. The threat from China specifically is very real. If you look at the F-35 and you look at China's newest plane, they look almost exactly the same. And with DoD, the F-35 is basically considered a supercomputer. And China has been working very hard to make sure that their computing power, their ability to gather information and data and process it very quickly, make decisions very quickly, and move fast to make sure that they can get around the might and power of the United States military, which traditionally moves very slow. But we win because we're powerful. But the way to get around that is to move faster and make quicker decisions. They steal all that information from the DIB, in addition to other methods that are not related to this that I could go into, but the point is that we need to protect that information as well. So the next point here is to really start now. Start planning, thinking about what you need to do to get your organization compliant with these requirements, and really also protect your organization. The next point here to really get that started is review your current contracts. Look to see if you have the 7012 clause in your contracts. If you do, that is a clear indication that you will need to be compliant with maturity level 2, whether it's non-prioritized or prioritized. And then also consider your growth strategy. Maybe you don't have those now, but this is a competitive advantage. There are a lot of organizations out there that they are waiting and waiting, and they're waiting until the final rule comes out, and it will be too late at that point because DoD is going to start using this immediately. It's still going to be a phased rollout. They're only going to use it on certain contracts year 1, then they'll expand it in year 2, and it'll be a full 5-year rollout until the CMMC is used in every contract. But those organizations that do this early, there will be a competitive advantage. I'm very confident in that. The next point here is after you've reviewed those and decided what is the best way to move ahead from a strategy standpoint or from current contract, from compliance standpoint, is to do a gap analysis if it makes sense. The gap analysis, if you know that you're not compliant, you're just using, I'll just say Google Workspace, and you're just using it for email and you're using Google Docs, you have nothing set up, it may not make sense to get a gap analysis done and pay for that. If you can accept reality and know that I have no cybersecurity posture, let me just get some quotes for remediation, and go from there, just do that. Don't get analysis paralysis and not make any moves because you assume that it's expensive, because there are organizations out there that not only are they more cost effective and willing to work with small and medium businesses, but there are organizations out there that are willing to work with you. And depending on your financial situation, they may set up payment plans with you or work out something else. This is America. We can't play let's make a deal. But at least get the information so you can make a more informed decision instead of being potentially paralyzed by all the information being put out about how this is too expensive. Then after you get that information, just start planning and budget. Okay, I have my numbers. What are they saying is the remediation time to close the gaps that I have? Because maybe you had a gap analysis done and you want to go ahead and move forward with closing those gaps. But now you've got your budget, you've got your plan, you know how you want to move ahead, and then execute. Get it done. Really, at the end of the day, I would recommend doing all 130 controls from CMMC 1.0 because I believe that they will be coming back into play. And getting those ingrained in your company now is going to serve you better in the long run. But I understand that sometimes cost is going to be an issue. Well, cost is always an issue, but implementing those at the beginning, I think over the long run will be more cost effective and put you in a better spot with your cybersecurity posture and your compliance. So I know I went significantly over time, but I appreciate everyone's attention, and I'll turn it over to Nathan for Q&A.
Thanks, Derek. That was very informative, and I think really kind of hit the mark on what's going on right now with CMMC 2.0. I think we have some time for Q&A. Jeanette, are there any questions you'd like to highlight for Derek and myself?
Yes, so, and thank you for that presentation, Derek. It looks like, so we have from Mark Stoops, when do you expect CMMC 2.0 to become law? August 2022 to November 2023, 9 to 24 months of rulemaking.
So when DoD released the initial statement, it said 9 to 24 months. This was in November. So, I mean, working that ahead, it could be, they could put the final rule out for public comment sometime in August of 2022, all the way to November of 2023. The main thing here is that when the final rule does come out, there will be a mandatory 60-day public comment period. So going back to those organizations that may be waiting for the final rule to be published, if they want it to be a competitive advantage and use CMMC to grow their organization, 60 days will not be enough time to remediate an environment or even to get the process started, because there's going to be a proposal period. An organization is going to want to review those proposals, obviously, select a vendor, get everything kicked off. And the accreditation body, which I want to also make a point that we're talking about the CMMC model here and not the program. They are two different things. The model is from DoD and the program/ecosystem is the accreditation body. But the accreditation body recommends 6 months to get remediated for maturity level 2 or maturity level 3.
All right, thank you. And it looks like for Nate, Justin Rowland is asking, what gap assessment are you providing?
Yeah, and thanks, Justin, for that question. And happy to answer or set up meetings with anybody who has any questions about our gap assessment, our phase 1 support. But the gap assessment provides compliance with the DFAR 7012 clause and creates a plan of action, a milestone for your company, a system security plan, an incident response plan, conducts vulnerability scans of your systems, and pretty much tells you what gaps you might have in for CMMC level 2 or the Nist 800-171 controls that will need to be remediated. And it also provides you your SPURS score so that you can enter into SPURS to become compliant with the current requirement on the books right now. And like I said before, it is partially subsidized by the DoD. We have a grant through DoD to support gap assessments. Those spots are limited, so please contact me at nsable@genedge.org or through the website genedge.org, and we can help you with the grant as well as the gap assessment.
All right, thank you. Looks like there's also a highlighted question from Abdullah Seka. First, he wants to make sure that we can have a copy of this presentation. Second, he is saying, will there be a sample language for a senior company official must sign a self-attestation annually, or will companies have to formulate their own? SOX 404 has attestation language for the CEO and CFO for their SEC filings.
I can't speak specifically to which senior level official in the organization will have to self-attest, but I do know that it will be C-suite, so it would likely be the CIO, the CISO, or the CEO. I don't believe it will go to board of directors.
And my understanding is the owner of the company or owners is ultimately responsible for their cybersecurity compliance and would be on the hook for that, is my understanding as well. And we have recorded this webinar with Derek. We will be posting it on our LinkedIn page as well as our website for individuals who missed part of it and want to see more. They'll have that option, and we'll also try to email it out to all the participants.
All right, and do we have time for one more question, two more questions? What do you want to do?
We have time for one more question, but
I see a question from Mark Stoops that I would like to address. I think the question that Mark put in about knowing and identifying CUI is very relevant, and it's something that I hear a lot from organizations that we're speaking with about this. So the question that Mark put out here is, well, more of a statement. Statement is, we still have a basic problem with knowing, identifying CUI. How do we get through this problem? What's being done? CMMC 2.0 will not work if the government does not clear up the CUI problems. And Mark is exactly right. Now, and good thing is DoD has addressed this. I think there's people are a little bit jaded with DoD when it comes to this, though. But basically, they're aware they have a problem with identifying what is and what is not CUI. They have the CUI registry out there, which I believe is on the DoD's acquisition website. So you can look at the categories for what is CUI. However, they know that they are not doing a good job of having the KOs, COs, the contracting officer, knowing what is CUI on the contract, as well as informing the client. So what they previously stated in the Katie Arrington era was that when CMMC is implemented and a contract has a maturity level that is used for CUI, that there will be a meeting of the minds between the client, the contracting officer, and the contractor. And they will sit down and clearly identify what is and what is not CUI. And one of the things that I've recommended many times is that if and when those meetings happen, again, we have to go on good faith here and assume that this will start happening at some point. When CMMC is finalized, is that, make sure that there's language in the document. If there are documents that are labeled CUI, that there's consistent language that is labeling it as CUI, because there are technical tools out there where you can automatically apply labels to that, but also that will make sure that everyone working on a contract knows what is and what is not CUI. Very, very critical.
Okay, are we all set, or?
Yeah, I think we went over a little bit on our time. Don't want to take up too much of everybody's time, but I think by popular demand, this has been a useful webinar, and we will try to do more of these, maybe monthly throughout the year, to provide you with timely updates to CMMC and things that we are doing to support companies like yourselves in the CMMC world. So I think we'll do another one of these and hopefully answer more of your questions as possible. And if you have questions that did not get answered, please email myself. I'm happy to answer any of them. I've also included Derek's email. Derek is doing a great job over at DTS, and they've been kind of at the forefront of this. So happy to support, and thank you very much for joining, and we'll see you at our next webinar.